Hello, 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 and welcome back to another college football video. Today, man, we have the Week 10 college football rod poll. And listen, man, it's pretty much, I'm not going to say it's in the home stretch. There's still a few big games left to play off the top of my head. Penn State, Ohio State, Georgia, Tennessee, Texas A&M. The Big 12 is still wide open. The ACC second place is still wide open. So there are still a few things to be resolved. However, I feel like by this point, we kind of know who the good teams are. We're just waiting for them to get their big matchups out the way. So, with that being said, y'all, thank y'all for watching, and let's get straight into the video. Make sure y'all can see this here. All right. Starting off number one, it's been the same team that it's been ever since they beat Ohio State a few weeks ago. Oregon hosted my 17th best team in the country, Illinois. I believe they hosted them, and they completely whooped their ass. I mean, it was not really close per se. Oregon, man, these last two games against Purdue and Illinois, they got off to a lead early, explosive start, great defense, and they did not let their foot off the gas. I don't believe they allowed a touchdown this game to Illinois, which is beyond impressive. Dylan Gabriel continues. People were not talking about him in the Heisman at all earlier this year, but as Oregon continues to win, that Ohio State game really it didn't put him on the map, but I think it kind of made people recognize, oh wait, Dylan Gabriel's one of the best quarterbacks in the country. I forgot where I had him. I might have called Dylan Gabriel the best returning quarterback in college football, and I don't think I was off in that assessment. If he's not, number two or three, he's top three without a shadow of a doubt. Dylan Gabriel has been amazing for Oregon this season. The run game has really picked it up. I remember earlier in the season, their run game was not where I thought it should have been, but now, without a shadow of a doubt, it is in full effect. Four players over 50 yards. They have a versatile group of receivers, and defensively, three sacks, two takeaways. If they didn't give up a touchdown this game to Illinois, I don't think they've given up a touchdown 2 weeks in a row against Big Ten teams. That is beyond impressive. Oregon, if you don't have Oregon as your number one team in the country, you don't know what you're talking about. And Oregon, without a shadow of a doubt, has looked like the best team in the country up to this point. Georgia has a bye week. Um, their next game is against Florida, I think. I'm not going to call that a gimme game. Florida has a winning record. Some people did not think they'd have a winning record up to this point. I think Florida has exceeded expectations, at least, right now that is. And Georgia, they have not looked great. And even though they haven't looked great, they've still beat Texas. They beat, I mean, they beat Clemson. They have two top 10 wins, does Georgia right now. Carson Beck has looked very, very shaky, and that's being generous. The run game has not been the whole offense, really, I wouldn't say is on Georgia level. Defensively, I think they're playing very well. They showcase just how good they still are. I mean, both of their top 10 wins, Clemson and Texas, that defense was daunting. And if that Georgia defense comes to play in the big time games, they absolutely can still win the national championship. But this offense still has a lot of questions left to be answered. Notably, can Carson Beck over this bye week, kind of just get himself together? Because if Georgia's going to go on a run, they're going to have what, five regular season games, the SEC championship game, and then what, two playoff games if they get a bye. So I mean, they still have a long ways to go if they plan on making a deep run. So Carson, I mean, they're pretty much not even halfway through the season yet. So there's still a lot of time to turn it around. But up to this point, Carson Beck, not been what we've expected out of him. Number three, I have Miami. This is now the highest they've come for me. They jump up one spot, 8-0. They beat up on Florida State. Everybody beats up on Florida State. The game itself was not that impressive. What did impress me is that Florida State did manage to kind of shut down Miami's pass attack. And guess what? Didn't even matter. They leaned on this run game and managed to run their way straight to their usual 30-plus point performance. Damian Martinez finally, when they got Damian Martinez out of the transfer portal, I was saying, like, oh my goodness, this is one of the most slept on, under the radar moves in the entire country. Damian Martinez was a monster last year at Oregon State. He's going to come in and be a dog at Miami. And he's been a good role player. The problem is they've had so many guys between Noah Lyle and Mark Fletcher And obviously, they have an amazing pass game. They don't need to rely on the run game. But they did this game. They gave Martinez his shot, and he absolutely balled out. He was murdering Florida State through the ground. And defensively, I mean, nothing really to say here. They shut down Florida State. Everybody shuts down Florida State. So, listen, apparently this was the first time that Cristobal had beaten Florida State as the Miami head coach. So take that for what you will. Yeah, Miami's legit. If Miami was not up to par, they would have slipped up by now. I don't know who they play coming down the stretch, but I know they don't play Clemson. They already played Louisville. I don't know if they play Pitt or SMU. But I mean, it'll. I think they avoid all the other top dogs in the ACC. So their path to the ACC championship game is pretty much set in stone. So, of avoiding or barring catastrophe, we know that Miami is going to be a player come December and January. Number four, I have Ohio State. They dropped one spot for me because of their disappointing game against Nebraska. Here's the thing, y'all. Coming off their loss to Oregon, they had a bye week. It is very important to me how teams look following a big win and following a big loss. Ohio State had a big loss to Oregon. They had a week to gather themselves, and they came out and played arguably their worst game of the season against Nebraska. I thought they looked better against Oregon, especially offensively. They couldn't run the ball. They could not run the ball. I believe they were at home. They couldn't run the ball at home against Nebraska, who just got ran all over by Indiana the week before. Nebraska got 50 hung on them in Bloomington, Indiana, and Ohio State managed to put up 21 by the skin of their teeth. Um, thank goodness for Jeremiah Smith and Cardinal Tate because they both had a bomb downfield that gave Ohio State some type of an offense because they were unable to put long drives together. It was a shot player, it was nothing. Will Howard had the Will Howard stat line between 200 and 300 yards, 3 touchdowns, and a pick. He's had this in pretty much every single game. If nothing else, he's consistent. Defensively, he held Nebraska to 17. They did their job there. But, man, what is going on with the Ohio State offensive line allowing just, or I guess providing just 64 rushing yards? You can't say it's the running backs. They have the best running back tandem in college football. So how bad is this offensive line? I know they've had several injuries there, but man, 64 rush yards at home. That is a massive concern. If that's the case, then beating Penn State comes into question. If that's the case, beating Indiana comes into question. If Ohio State's run game is more of a concern than a dominating strength, I am almost certain they will finish the season with 2 losses. But because keep in mind, guys, Ohio State, they're either going to play Penn State and Indiana and lose one of those games and miss the Big Ten championship game, or win both of those games and then play Oregon again in the Big Ten championship game. What I'm saying is, at this point in time, it's getting very hard to see a 12-1 Ohio State going into the playoffs. That I'm just saying, and I think an 11-2 Ohio State makes the playoff. But if they lose one of these 2 regular season games and they finish the year 10-2, no Big Ten championship appearance, things get very, very tricky in that situation. I'd still probably include them, assuming the loss to Penn State or Indiana is close. I'd still probably include them in the playoff. But man, things would get very sticky. And Ryan Day's seat would become burning hot if they missed the Big Ten championship game. That would be, oh man. Because that would be what? That would be the 4th year in a row, right? The 4th year in a row without a Big Ten championship appearance. That would be disastrous for Ohio State. I don't know if they missed it. I think Michigan. I know for sure Michigan made it with the last 2 years. I don't know, to be honest. I know Michigan had 3 straight wins and missing. It would basically be 4 straight disappointing years for Ohio State. Number 5, I got Notre Dame jumping up one spot. I just thought this win versus Navy was just really impressive. And some people can say, well, it's Navy. You know, Notre Dame had a massive talent discrepancy, and that's true. But we saw them lose to Northern Illinois. So the whole talent discrepancy, it doesn't matter. They've already shown us this year that they can just do nothing and not even come to play against the unranked G5 team. So beating Navy, ranked Navy in this way, it did mean a lot to me. Obviously, they're on a 6-game win streak following the NIU loss. This is their 3rd ranked win of the season. They beat A&M, Louisville, and now Navy. and this was their best offensive performance. I mean, what Riley Leonard had a very this is kind of turning into the Riley Leonard stat line, if you will, between 250, 300 yards and multiple touchdowns. The run game has been as it has been the last month and a half, which is incredibly dominant. The defense continues to be incredible. 6 takeaways against Navy. I think it was only like one pick. I think Navy fumbled like 5 or 6 times. So Notre Dame's defense when we talk about the best, when I go back and I make my video talking about the best 5 or 6 defenses from from this season, I'm almost positive Notre Dame's defense is going to make an appearance with or without Benjamin Morrison. Those guys come to play and they are physical and they have been dominant up to this point so far. So yeah, Notre Dame possibly their best win of the season because the A&M game didn't look that great, and also I don't think A&M was that good at that point. So I think this might really be their best one of the season so far. So Notre Dame jumps up to even higher than they started out for me. I mean, even after they beat A&M, I don't think Notre Dame was in my top 5. So Notre Dame possibly, and I did not see this coming. I absolutely did not see this coming. So Notre Dame, after their disastrous Week 2 performance, climbs their way all the way back in to my top 5. Texas, however, drops one spot. Like I said, guys, I take Texas and Ohio State are a very similar boat for me. Coming off a loss, I paid very close attention to how a team bounces back. Texas did not bounce back well. And listen, I give Vanderbilt more credit than most people. I think Vanderbilt clearly has shown, whether it was Missouri, Alabama, Kentucky, or Texas, every single SEC game that Vanderbilt has played, they've either won or lost in incredibly close fashion. Vanderbilt is no joke. So don't get that mistaken. But I'm saying this could have been you could have replaced Vanderbilt with Kentucky or Florida or South Carolina. The point is that coming off a massive loss, a program shaking loss that kind of proved that you're not at that top level yet. This is the performance you put out. Multiple picks from Quinn Ewers, still not getting that run game back on track. Back to back weeks where this defense gives up 20 plus after being like the best scoring defense in the country up to this point. The questions we had from the Georgia game, Quinn Ewers in big games, the Texas run game, um, the defense not looking like themselves previously. These questions that we had are still left unanswered. They did not close the door on any of these things. And now listen, the Texas defense thing, they've had 3+ takeaways in each of the last 2 games. I'm not really concerned about the Texas defense, but man, only 104 rushing yards, multiple pit turnovers again from Quinn Ewers. I'm kind of concerned here. I am kind of concerned for Texas. They won on the road against a team that we've already seen can upset, a team. But listen, this is just not the type of game I was looking at. I was looking from Texas. I was expecting a beat down from Texas in this game, and it didn't happen. So they dropped one spot for me. Next up, we got Clemson on bye. They remain as my number 7. Cade Klubnik is playing out of his mind. Should absolutely be in the Heisman conversations. Their run game has looked very solid. Phil Maffa, even without Will Shipley, he has taken over that RB1 role nicely. He is the most important weapon on this Clemson team. The wide receiver core is still not all that. Defensively, this is the interesting thing, though. Defensively from Clemson, they look a little susceptible to me. 23 points per game from a Clemson defense is not what we're used to seeing. They gave up massive games to, I believe, Virginia and who was the last team they played? Was it Wake Forest? They've had multiple, like back-to-back bad defensive games from Clemson. So keep an eye on that. I think they play Pitt. I don't know if they play SMU, but if they play one of these high-powered offenses coming up, keep an eye on that Clemson defense. They might end up losing them a game. So that is a concern. But Clemson, who would have thought Clemson's offense is more than making up for a lackluster defense this year? So they stay at my number 7. Tennessee also with the bye week. I mean, I feel like the story with Tennessee is pretty much just it is what it is. Dylan Sampson should be a Heisman candidate. Without Dylan Sampson, this is probably a 3-loss team. Defensively, amazing defense. 11.5 points per game allowed. Um, Amazing defense, great run game, Heisman level running back. The problem is the quarterback. Who would have thought? But it is what it is. Tennessee, they got their win over Alabama. They don't really have to beat Georgia. If Tennessee finishes 10-2, I'm pretty confident they'd make the college football playoff. But they still need a good performance against Georgia. And hey, with how Georgia's looked this season, if that Tennessee defense can force a couple picks by Carson Beck, absolutely Tennessee could beat Georgia in Athens, but it's still a long shot in my opinion. A&M moves up 2 spots. They get into the top 10 for the first time ever in the Rod. This is Rod poll history right here. A&M in the top 10 for the first time ever. They beat LSU. They are now on the seventh of a 7-game winning streak. Marcel Reed, he came in for Connor Wegman, who got benched, I think, deservingly so. Listen, man, this Connor Wegman guy, I don't know what people see in him. I just I just do not think this guy is a top level quarterback. I mean, he's talked about as like a draft prospect. I mean, a draft prospect. I don't know if he could draft to the UFL at this point. Marcel Reed came in and saved A&M. He had 3 touchdowns. They ran the ball incredibly well. Le'Veon Moss continues to be a very good back for them. And defensively, they forced the worst game out of Garrett Nussmeier I've seen this season. 3 takeaways, 2 sacks. A&M A&M at home is a problem unless you're Notre Dame. But A&M now has multiple top 15 SEC wins over LSU and Missouri at home. And guess what? A&M's loss is out of conference. They are undefeated. They are the number one team in the SEC right now. I think A&M, who do they play? I think their toughest game coming up is South Carolina, if I'm not mistaken. I think A&M has a clear path, like a guaranteed shot, because Tennessee, who would they lose to? They lost to Arkansas. So Tennessee has the SEC loss. Georgia has the SEC loss. Alabama has what, two? Vanderbilt and Tennessee. Alabama has 2 SEC losses. A&M, I think, is with this because they beat LSU, who also was undefeated in SEC play. I think A&M is the only undefeated SEC team, and they have like a clear path. It's pretty much at this point in time, A&M and who? That's the question. Because if they beat Texas, well, if A&M beats Texas, we're talking about a top 5 ranked A&M hosting. Well, not it would be a neutral site, but like they would be the team that's like to beat in the SEC championship. So again, shout out to Mike Elko. The job he has in 8 games, he has positioned Texas A&M in a better spot than Jimbo Fisher ever had them in. It took him 8 games. Some people are really not hating, but really like dismissing the Mike Elko hire when it happened. But this guy came in and transformed Texas A&M. So all credit where it's due to Mike Elko. He's done an amazing job. A&M is sitting very pretty right now at 7-1. Next up, I have Alabama. They don't change for me. They beat. Listen, just ignore where I had Missouri ranked last week. I was completely wrong. Alabama played a very flawless game. Milroe did his job. They ran the ball down Missouri's throat. The defense shut down fucking Drew Pine in Missouri. This was just a clean, good old fashioned beatdown by Alabama on Missouri. But it's not impressive to me. Missouri, I massively overrated. Brady Cook was hurt, but honestly, I don't think it would have made much of a difference. Um, this is a good bounce back, though. Coming off the Tennessee loss, Alabama looked to rebound very, very well. Um, this was their best game that they've played in a long time. Their best complete game that they've played since the fucking Wisconsin game. So, is Alabama back on track? I'm not sure. They still have to beat who is it? They play LSU. Who else? Do they play Oklahoma? I think they might play Oklahoma. They don't have to play Texas. Already played Georgia. Already played Tennessee. Don't play Ole Miss, I don't think. So Alabama does have that clear path to 10-2. Does the 10-2 Bama get into the playoff? I have to assume so. So we'll see. We'll see how Alabama finishes the season. Obviously, been a very rocky path up to this point, but not really a shot at the SEC championship game either. But we'll see. They still have a chance, okay, and a good chance at that. Penn State, they dropped 2 spots for me. The overall performance against Wisconsin was not that impressive to me. Wisconsin obviously has their backup quarterback. Um, Penn State ran the ball effectively, defensively did a good job, but the thing that really drops them for me is the injury to Drew Aller. He suffered an unnamed knee injury. The backup came in, and the backup actually played pretty well. I think his name was like Prabula or something like that, but I don't really know. But the severeness of Drew Aller's injury here, even if he is able to play in the Ohio State game, I mean, his mobility certainly is going to be compromised. I don't think they'd beat Ohio State anyways, but obviously any sort of quarterback injury. And keep in mind what this is, guys. This is talking about if they play tomorrow. So even a small term injury does affect the rankings on here. So Penn State, without possibly a starting quarterback, I have to drop them below Alabama and A&M. Number 12, I have Indiana. They jump up 3 spots after an impressive win over Washington. This is with their backup quarterback as well. They lost their starter against Nebraska. The backup came in and he did a very serviceable job. They were able to run the ball very well. 3.6 yards per carry, 2 touchdowns. Justice Ellison, the running back, 30 touches, did his job very well. And the defense came to play. 3 sacks, 2 takeaways. We know how explosive this Washington offense can be, and they did not let the game get away from them. They kept it right in front. They ran the ball effectively. They had a good game plan going to this one, and Indiana improves to 8-0. Man, if they, as long as they have their healthy quarterback, man, I don't know who they play beside. I know they play Ohio State. That's a massive game. Outside of that, I'm not sure. Is Indiana pretty much guaranteed 10 win with a bowl game? I'd say so. I mean, it cannot be or it cannot be overstated. The job that the Signetti guy has done. I thought Indiana, just based on their roster, was going to be the worst team in the Big Ten this year. I don't know if I called them. I might have put them like second worst or third worst, but I thought Indiana was not going to be good. But man, have they proven everybody wrong? And that Ohio State game could be absolute son. Just based off how Ohio State looked against Nebraska, Indiana really could pull off a it's already been a special season, but it could be a special season if they manage to keep this momentum rolling. They're all the way up to number 12 for me in my rankings. Next up, we have Kansas State. They beat Kansas. Listen, they beat Kansas by 2 points. They got two things going here. First of all, you have Kansas being like the best 2-win team in the country, or one. I don't even know how many wins they have. There, I don't even want to talk about Kansas, but you have a rivalry game, and you also have Kansas being much better than their record says they are. So only beating Kansas by 2 points, I'm not going to hold that against Kansas State. Their last two games have been Colorado and Kansas, and they managed to win both of those. I'm very impressed by that. Avery Johnson, this is how I felt about Avery Johnson. Early in the season, I thought he was getting a lot of unwarranted hype based off just potential alone. I had to see him play well. And early in the season, he did not play well, and I called him out when I saw. I just called it as I see it. He was, he was getting too much hype for not a lot of production. Then he was not playing well. I said he was not playing well, and guess what? Now he's playing very well. I am not afraid to say it. Avery Johnson is playing like one of the best quarterbacks in the country right now. But the strength of this team is still DJ Giddens in the run game. That has been the focus of Kansas State for years and years at this point. Defensively, 1 sack, 2 takeaways. They did their job. They come out with a close win over Kansas. And this is the thing, man. There's a reason why out of all the preseason, there was a top 5 in the Big 12 preseason. It was Kansas State, Utah, Oklahoma State, Arizona, and Kansas. There's a reason Kansas State is the only kind of one remaining out of that group. And it's because their coaching and their culture and just how good they've been consistently over these last 4 or 5 years. Remember, were they the runners up to the conference championship game a couple of years ago? I think no, they beat TCU for the conference championship like what 3 years ago. So this Kansas State team has been good for a while, and this is just a continuation of that. They're at 13 for me. 14, I got Ole Miss. They jump up 2 spots because they beat Oklahoma. Things were getting very shaky in the first half. I think it was like 14-10 Oklahoma. Then the defense came to play. They did not give up a single point in the second half. Jackson Dart looked good. No Trey Harris this game. So the past game, they were without their number 1 receiver. Also, they could not run the ball this game, which is just I don't get it, man. Ole Miss has a stable of running backs. They should definitely and a mobile quarterback. They should be able to produce way more than 69 rushing yards per game. That is unacceptable. Defensively, here's the thing. It's said that Ole Miss had 10 sacks. I'm not saying I don't believe that, but something just seems a little off about that. Same thing with LSU here. 10 sacks seems kind of crazy. I'll mention it, but I don't know if it's true, so I didn't write it down here. I feel like somebody just made a typo. I don't know, but it said Ole Miss had 10 sacks. If that's true, god damn. This Ole Miss defense, I cannot over exaggerate how good Ole Miss is. It might be the best defense in the entire SEC barring like Tennessee maybe. This Ole Miss defense has been incredible. And that's coming from a team whose defensively has been terrible the last couple of years. I mean, just look at last year. They gave up what 50 to Georgia. They gave up like 50 or 49 to LSU last year. This was a terrible defense, and they made a complete turnaround this offseason. So give Ole Miss some credit for that. They have to play Georgia and beat Georgia to make the college football playoff, and I don't see that happening. But this Ole Miss defense has not been the reason that they are disappointing right now. LSU, they dropped one spot because, like I said, A&M was already ahead of LSU in my ranking, so I would have picked A&M to beat LSU on a neutral field. They were at home. I expected LSU to lose this game, but I did not really think they would lose in this fashion. I mean, the defense did its job. They shut down Connor Wegman. A&M brings in a backup quarterback, and I think kind of catches LSU by surprise. LSU did not look prepared to deal with the mobile quarterback in that game. Nussmeier, he threw three picks, and man, right when I thought LSU was getting their run game going, when they need it most, it vanished. They could not run the ball against Texas A&M. It continues to be a massive problem for them defensively. I didn't put a number here because it said LSU had like it said on ESPN that a guy on LSU's defense had 7 sacks. I just can't believe that. Because if that was true, I would have seen that shit everywhere on ESPN in college football sports. I would have seen that everywhere, but I haven't seen that, which leads me to believe it's just a typo or something. I think LSU had like 12 sacks this game. It's on ESPN. I'm not going to write that down. Kyron Lacey and Aaron Anderson had both. They both had massive games. Was not enough. The defense let LSU down yet again. Even though LSU's defense had looked really good the last couple weeks, did not show up when it mattered. It's their first conference loss, so their season is far from over. If they beat Bama, LSU still has a really good chance to get into the not only the college football playoff, but also the SEC championship game. SEC championship game. But if they lose one more time, the season's over, and that includes like they'd have to go on a like an undefeated run and win the SEC championship game to make the playoff. But still some hope. Listen, LSU, after losing Jaden Daniels, the expectations were not that high anyway. So if they go 10-3, that's still a good year for LSU. Moving on, Boise State, they jump up 2 spots for me. They beat UNLV, a good UNLV team that is. And by the way, they did this without a massive game from Ashton Jeanty. That is very impressive to me. Maddox Mason, the quarterback, played one of, if not his best games of the season. They ran the ball effectively without Jeanty. Defensively, 6 sacks. I mentioned how this Boise State front seven continues to generate massive amounts of pressure. They might be leading the country in sacks, to be honest, that Boise State defense. This is a massive win. UNLV probably is the toughest game on their schedule remaining, and they got the job done there. So it looks like Boise State now is going to coast to that 11-1 record and possibly rematch UNLV in the Mountain West Championship game. So good win for them. Colorado also jumps up 2 spots for me. A very good win over Cincinnati. And don't get mistaken here, this was a blowout that they kind of let their foot off the gas in the fourth quarter. Shedeur Sanders played an amazing game. And that's coming off back-to-back not so great performances, especially last week against Arizona. He had like 3 turnovers. He just did not look like himself. He bounced back in a big-time way this game. The run game. The Colorado run game, especially these last 2 weeks against Arizona, it's probably been a record for them. They've run for like, I think, 270 plus yards these last 2 weeks, maybe 260. That is absolutely a record in a 2 week stretch under the Deion Sanders era. Augustine was their number one rusher this game. They looked like they found something between this offensive line and this run game recently, and it's helped out their pass game tremendously. Travis Hunter, possibly his best game of the season, 153 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 4 pass breakups defensively. He is not the Heisman, in my opinion. It is still Ashton Jeanty, but Travis Hunter is a close. I would not mind a co-Heisman this year, honestly, because Ashton Jeanty and Travis Hunter are both doing things we've never seen before. It feels like a justified year. I think they've done it before. I'm not if I'm not, I think they've done it before. The precedent is there. I would absolutely not mind a joint Heisman between Ashton Jeanty and Travis Hunter. That's just my opinion. Defensively, not their best game, but still a good game. Like I said, they let their foot off the gas. They were in firm control of this game. The defense made multiple big stops without takeaways, by the way. They made multiple big stops without takeaways and shut down Cincinnati when it mattered when the game was close. SMU, A big win. Listen, they did a lot of bad things this game. I'll just get straight to it. They lost the turnover battle 6-0. I'll say that again. They lost the turnover battle 6-0 and won the game. I don't even know what to say. Their defense played masterfully. To lose a turnover about 6-0, all the short fields this defense had to defend, and to give up less than 30 points is a miracle. The run game was doing good. Kevin Jennings had his worst professional game, or I mean, college game of his young career. Um, Roderick Daniels and Rashard Smith nearly 300 combined yards and 3 touchdowns. This was a insane. I think it went to overtime and like a blocked field goal. SMU, make no mistake about it, SMU stole this game from Duke. They absolutely should not have won this game. They deserved to lose. They made more than enough mistakes. I don't think I've ever seen anything like this. 6 turnovers, 6-0, and you win the game. Yeah, listen, they showed an insane amount of resilience and fight and toughness in this game to even come back from that alone. For this not to be a blowout was impressive. For them to win, they move up 3 spots for me, 3 spots for me. They are still undefeated in the ACC. SMU, Pitt, Miami, and Clemson, all undefeated in the SEC over half or the ACC, sorry, over halfway through the year. SMU jumps up to number 18. Number 19, I have Illinois. This is kind of the LSU situation a little bit. They lost on the road to a team that's better than them. So I'm not gonna like that's not gonna kill my opinion of Illinois because they lost the best team in the country on the road. The lack of fight is concerning. Oh, okay. They did score. I talked about earlier how Oregon hadn't allowed a touchdown in 2 weeks. They did score a rushing touchdown. It looks like Luke Altmaier, though. These last couple weeks from him, and their 3 biggest games, right? It looks like to me, whenever Illinois plays a good defense in Michigan, Penn State, and Oregon now, Luke Altmaier in this past game completely disappears. That is concerning, but maybe it's just the fact about Illinois. Maybe they cannot, maybe they don't have the players to play as good against top level defenses as they do against everybody else. And that's fine. That's most teams, but I thought Illinois was a little bit better than that. Defensively, they didn't show up. It was just a bad game from Illinois, but I am going to give them a chance to bounce back from this, and we'll see if they can finish the season strong. Number 20 of Iowa State. It was a bye week from them. Uh, you know, I'll say this. I've been more impressed by Iowa State than I have been from BYU, but I have not been massively impressed by either of these teams. I know both of these teams are ranked like the top 11 of the AP poll, but I truly believe that every one of these teams that I have above Iowa State and BYU would beat those teams on a neutral site. Like in a playoff environment, I think all of these teams would beat Iowa State and BYU. That's just my opinion. I could be wrong. Iowa State has a good defense, but they did not show up against UCF. They have 2 really good receivers, a solid quarterback, a good run game. There's not a lot of things to not like about Iowa State, but we'll see. We'll see how they look. I mean, all that's really to see is if they play each other, who's better. One of these 2 teams will almost certainly get into the college football playoff if they remain undefeated. So there's still a long ways to go for Iowa State. I don't know, man. I just I don't know what to say. I'm not a big believer in either of these teams. Army, bye week for them. They move up 2 spots for me. Bryson Daly, with 20, he is by far the only quarterback in the country with 10 plus touchdowns and no picks. I feel confident saying that. They do look better than Navy. That is without doubt to me. They run the ball for over 350 yards a game. Kanye Udo has been a very good running back defensively. Defensively from Army, 12.4 points per game allowed, and that's without having an obscene amount of sacks or takeaways. They're doing it through good old fashioned physicality, good coaching, few penalties, winning the turnover battle. Army is just doing everything the right way. Will they beat Notre Dame? Well, after what I saw this week, I'm going to have to say no. But it looks like Army Navy is both going to go to the AC or the AAC championship game with 0 conference losses because unless Army plays Tulane or Memphis, which I think I wouldn't know about if they would, I probably would have figured that out. But hey, man, we'll see what happens. Army is ranked at number 21 for me, the highest of every AAC team. BYU, and I have four, by the way, in my rankings. BYU number 22 for me. They move up three spots. This is a good win for them. UCF, as I've said before, is a tough team to beat. The quarterback had a good game. They ran the ball very effectively, over 250 rushing yards. They ran it down UCF's throat. Defensively, two takeaways, one sack, four players, over 50 yards. It's so weird to me. I don't look at BYU and think of a good offense at all. I think of a good defense and a well coached team. But if you look at it, they've scored like 30 plus points in every game but one against like SMU, I think. So BYU statistically has been a very good offense, but for some reason I just don't think that for some reason. It's just I don't know, man, but they're 8-0. You cannot deny that they're probably going to make the Big 12 championship game. I just like it's the same thing with Iowa State. I just don't know. I didn't think these teams were good preseason. I didn't think they were good in the first month of the season. I didn't think they were great in the second month of the season, and I don't think they're great now. It's just they're both undefeated. So I don't know. It's just weird. Same thing with Pitt, but they did have. I think Pitt's game this week against Syracuse was the most impressive one I've seen from any of these BYU, Iowa State, or Pitt. Pitt won with their defense, and it's the same thing that's happened. It's the same way they won against Cal. They completely shut Cal down, completely shut Syracuse down. They had five interceptions and three, counting three pick sixes by the Pitt defense. They only had like 200 yards of offense, and they put up 40 points. It didn't even matter. Syracuse defense actually played really well, but it was completely irrelevant. Um, Pitt's defense, five interceptions is fucking ridiculous. So three pick sixes, yeah, it was insane. Pitt jumps up two spots for me. They were number 23. Navy, they dropped four spots. I understand. I didn't expect them to beat Notre Dame. I didn't expect it to be rather close, but giving up 51, Navy's defense was pretty disappointing here. The numbers are inaccurate. I apologize. I messed up. I'll give the correct numbers for you. I apologize. Bad job from me right here. Let me pull up the accurate numbers from the Navy Notre Dame game. This is from last week's game from Navy. Let's see here. Okay, so the quarterback Blake Horvath for Navy, he had 88 passing yards, 129 rush yards. He had one touchdown, one interception. Navy as a team, they ran very well. They ran for 222 rushing yards, 5.2 yards per carry, two touchdowns. The offense it really wasn't the problem. The problem was the turnovers. They fumbled the ball seven times, did Navy? Seven fumbles. Three different players had two fumbles apiece. They lost five fumbles. They threw a pick. And defensively at that point, if like they were already going to be at a disadvantage here going against Notre Dame. But when you're giving them short field every time, it's just too tough of a hill to climb for Navy. Only one sack, no takeaways. The defense never stood a chance here, especially with all these turnovers. It was a very bad performance from Navy. You don't expect a team like Navy that's so well disciplined to turn the ball over that often, but is what happened. Everybody gets a bad game. Some of the top three teams in the country right now have played a terrible game or two. So we'll see how Navy responds. Number 25, I have Vanderbilt. I already mentioned it earlier in the Texas segment of this. Vanderbilt is not a bad team. They're not a team to be slept on. And I'm not going to drop them that far for playing a great game against a top five team. Diego Pavia, he threw two picks. That was really the difference in here, losing the turnover battle to Texas. Actually, I don't even know if they lost the turnover battle. They got two takeaways. They might have been dead even in the turnover battle. This Vanderbilt defense, man, credit where credit is due. Four sacks, two takeaways. Like they have had, I think, multiple takeaways against every one of these SEC opponents. And also, Vanderbilt's been able to run the ball against everybody in the SEC. Against Alabama, they had well over 100. Against Kentucky, they had over 100. Against Texas, they had over 100. Vanderbilt they have a really good rushing game. One play. This is the difference though. Against Alabama, they had a big game from a receiver. They did not have a massive game from any of their weapons in terms of running backs or receivers. That's what they needed. That would have been the difference in this game. Vanderbilt did not get that in this game. So they fall to 5-3 for me. But I'm only going to drop them one spot here. They put together a very admirable effort against Texas. Number 26, I got Washington State. They jump up four spots for me. They beat San Diego State. By the way, Washington State, their only loss is to Boise State here. Okay. So if you wonder, like, if did they beat some or did they lose some random team? No, they lost to Boise State here. They've beaten everybody else. The quarterback, John Mateer, is having one of the most impressive statistical seasons of anybody in the entire country. When I make my top 10 Heisman list, John Mateer most likely will be on that list. Almost 300 yards and 4 touchdowns. They didn't have to run the ball. They didn't have to run the ball all that well. John Mateer was their leading rusher. Kyle Williams, one of the best players that stayed on this Washington State team, 6 touches for 96 yards. Defensively, 4 sacks, 1 takeaway. It was a close one, maybe a little too close for comfort here against San Diego State, but Washington State improves to 7-1, and they jump up 4 spots to my number 26 team in the country. Memphis, they stay at 27 for me. They're kind of just in the Duke range. Like right now, they're not able to kind of jump up past this marker. And that's because they keep having way too close games in the AAC. I feel like they should be blowing these teams out or winning much more convincingly. But here you go, giving up 28 points to Charlotte. I think they had to win this game actually, like right at the wire. Mario Anderson, though, has been an absolute stud for them. What a pickup they made out of the transfer portal, getting Mario Anderson from South Carolina. The run game has been amazing. Defensively, 3 sacks, 2 takeaways, but you give up 28 to Charlotte. You just can't be doing that, man. Seth Hangen, good but not great game. Memphis wins. They improved to 7-1. Only loss being to Navy in the AAC. But I don't know, man. The record's good, but Navy's still just been a little bit disappointing. Or sorry, Memphis has been a little bit disappointing for me. Number 28, I got Tulane making their first appearance in several weeks here. They lost 2 games early to Kansas State. By the way, Kansas State was in controversial fashion. They probably should have beat Kansas State, but I'm not here to do woulda, coulda, shoulda. They outplayed Kansas State, in my opinion, but they did lose that game. And right after they lost to Oklahoma on the road. So they lost 2 back-to-back tough out-of-conference games to, at the time, ranked opponents. And ever since then, they've gone on a 5-game win streak. They just recently beat North Texas in a shootout. And here's the stats for their guys. Darian Wentz, I believe he's a freshman. He's been one of the best freshman quarterbacks in the country this year. Their run game is this like the focal point of this offense. Mekhi Hughes, he was a freshman last year. He is one of the best sophomores in the country this year with over 1,000 yards and 11 touchdowns in the year. Defensively, 17 takeaways from this Tulane defense. I mean, they give up a few points, but boy, they get sacks and takeaways here. Tulane is dangerous because, by the way, just like Army and Navy, Tulane is undefeated in the AAC. They do play Memphis, I believe, the final week of the season. That's a massive game because if Army and Navy loses the unexpected game, that means I think if Tulane beats Memphis, they'll get in the AAC championship game, and if they beat Army or Navy, they could completely fuck up the AAC's chances of getting a playoff team. So Tulane could play spoiler for everybody, hypothetically here. Duke at 29, like I said, they lost a ridiculous game to SMU. It's just a complete indictment on this Duke offense that you could not win a game, that you won 6-0 in the turnover battle. That's really embarrassing by Duke. But listen, you lose by 1 point to a team that I had ranked in my top 21. I'm not going to drop Duke for that. They're still going to be in my top 30. Oh man, what a disappointing performance this was by them. And the number 30 out of Arkansas. Matter of fact, I should have had Arkansas above Duke. Arkansas would absolutely whoop Duke if they play them tomorrow. Arkansas, they put up 58 points, albeit on the worst team in the SEC. But brother, they had like 700 yards of offense this game. Taylon Green, 6 touchdowns and nearly 400 yards. They ran the ball down Mississippi State's throat, and that's without their number one running back. They averaged 10 yards a carry. Braylon Russell came in 17 touchdowns, 186 yards. Oh, and by the way, they got 4 sacks and 5 takeaways. This is one of the best games in Arkansas fucking school history here. They put the fucking whooping on poor old, but man, Mississippi State might go 1-11. This shit has been bad for them. They lost to Arizona State earlier in the year, but hey, Arkansas, they get back into the rankings with a pretty good performance here. Listen, I decided to just drop Missouri out of my rankings entirely. They were just so bad. And they've played 2 ranked opponents. They beat Vanderbilt, which, I mean, they didn't get any credit for that at the time, but they've played 2 ranked opponents, Alabama and A&M, and they got dominated and embarrassed in both those games. When they got Drew Pine out of the transfer portal, I was like, you know what? If Brady Cook goes down to injury, Drew Pine is actually a pretty good, solid backup quarterback. That is not the case. He's played fucking terrible. The run game was actually going a little bit against Alabama. They could not get the ball in Luther Burden's hands for the life of them. The defense, I mean, they were hung out to dry. Offense put up 0 points. It was an embarrassing performance. Missouri is probably going to have to win multiple games before I even consider them for my top 30 again. I was wrong about Missouri. With or without injury, Brady Cook here, they probably still lose. I was just objectively wrong about Missouri. They could still go 10-2 though. Let's talk about that. They could still go 10-2. Syracuse, yeah, they drop out of my rankings. You can't throw 5 picks. Needless to say, you can't have 6 rushing. Yeah, this is a pretty rough stat line. I don't think I have, you guys can probably averaging zero point 0.2 yards per carry. Unless you're Colorado, you probably won't win any games doing that. So, yeah, Syracuse, the pretty bad game here, but they dropped out of my rankings probably for the last time. They've been flirting with it for a while, but they're probably after the last time here. That's going to be it for this video. This took a while. Listen, leave a like if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new, and I will see all of you in the next one. Peace.